All right, so we're going to do a little panel here. It's a 30-minute panel. I should probably put up a timer, I suppose. And so we only have two panelists up here, so what we're going to do is some of these questions. If something kind of pops up and it seems something you care a lot about, you want to say something, just raise your hand. I'll repeat whatever question you have, just since we have it for the audio stuff. We don't have to run around the mics then. But it would be nice to kind of have other feedback on what you've seen in your industry and what you care about. We're mainly going to be talking about vehicle stuff, but it applies to really anything hardware nowadays. Let me kick off this alarm real quick, or counter, and then we'll get started. Okay. So, all right, to kick this off, I'm Craig Smith, and I'll be the moderator for this one. I'll let you guys introduce yourself with whatever titles and stuff you feel like giving. You want to go first?
We need titles.
You don't have to. It's up to you.
I'm Ana Magazinius. I work as a senior researcher at the Research Institute of Sweden, and I experiment a lot on Volvo trucks, cars, buses, and rest of the stuff they have. So people and things.
Hi, my name is Abe Chen. I'm from NIO. It's a electric car company based out of San Jose, Shanghai, and Munich. I do a lot of PowerPoints and spreadsheets.
Excellent. Glad you have a background in PowerPoint. This will be good. All right, so to get started with this, so typically, like when vehicles used to work, they weren't terribly much a secret. We all knew how they worked, but as things become more digital, it become harder to understand how their functions work. Typically in hardware security, a lot of times our goal is to prevent people from downloading the firmware. And that's usually one of the main goals. Now, as we move forward to that, it becomes harder to do maybe repairs and do some tinkering. Is this a necessary evil in order to have more secure vehicles?
Could you just repeat again?
Yeah, I want to give some background for those who don't do the question. The question is so if our goal is in hardware is to prevent people from getting the firmware, and we're used to having access to certain things, that we were able to modify before. But as we went to digital, to become a little more locked down, our goal typically in hardware security is to lock things down, which a lot of times means not allowing them to get access to firmware. Is that just a necessary evil of security? So if we are going to make something more secure, do consumers lose the ability to do repairs or do those kinds of tinkering or modifications? There you go.
He's waving. I think, well, it depends, of course. I think we're moving more and more towards updates over the air and things like that. And of course, it's easier or more convenient for the customers, but also more insecure, obviously. So if it's necessary evil to make things less convenient and more secure, is that the question?
Do you think that's required?
If it's required,
of security. Yeah.
I think if you want to keep things more secure, I would say it's a good thing, but I think we'll see more over-the-air updates regardless. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Was that the answer to the question?
Oh, there's no right answers. Whatever you want.
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay, so my take on it is I don't see it as a evil, period. I think it's a requirement. We have grown with cars over the last 100+ years where we have been able to modify cars. So what we need to do is figure out a way to make it so that third parties can still modify cars, and yet we can make them as secure or more secure than they are today.
Did you say this is my wave? Anybody have a immediate feedback or question they want to add to this? Just my waving their hand. Right. Right. What about data collection? So companies are getting more into the data collection field. We were seeing things such as, Google, Apple's, they were starting to make IVI systems, but after that, we've seen pretty much everybody starting collecting from cloud-based research to self-driving research. Should consumers have a say in what kind of data is collected by them?
Absolutely. But I think we'll see a number of services where you have to give up data to get knowledge of something. So if you have, for example, accidents on the road, if you have ice on the road, and you want to know about that, then you have to give up that data as well, which is personal data, of course, because it tells people where you are at a certain point in time, right? So, but I think we'll see, I won't say forced sharing of data, but in order to get something good, you'll have to give up your data as well. I think that's what we'll see mainly. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, it will save lives, likely. But yeah.
Abe, you feel the same?
I think definitely, from my perspective, the consumer should have the choice of exactly what data is transmitted. From my perspective, I feel that the manufacturers should give the customer the option. Let's say, do I want to send my GPS direction? Yes or no. Do I want to send my vehicle identifier? Yes or no. And then if they choose no, and you still want to use that data for safety reasons, then anonymize as much as possible.
But it's impossible to do that.
Yes.
I mean, we know that.
Yes.
Well, pretty much impossible. So, so the question is, will we be forced into sharing data as well? Because as soon as there is data, and people know about it, some people will want you to share it with them. So your insurance company might say, I will not insure you unless you give me the data of your vehicles. I want to know when you're driving, how good you're driving, and so on. So then you're sort of a hostage just because there's a possibility of sharing data. Of course, you can choose not to have a car or, not to have insurance, which is illegal. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe perhaps I might be idealizing this perfect world in some ways, but I think that we will reach the point where maybe one day, hopefully in my lifetime, we'll realize that there's no way for us to secure data in the cloud. It's just proven, we buy these firewalls, we buy all these products from different vendors, we do this multi-layered approach, we do everything that we can. We spend a lot of money and we're still getting hacked, right? So data, I don't feel, if it's not anonymized, it's secure in the cloud. So what I think that needs to happen is that individual IoT components need to be responsible for anonymizing that data, and there needs to be some mechanism that perhaps we opt into this anonymized data being sent to the insurance company, if the insurance company has to do it. But eventually, maybe we'll wake up one day and realize that, and maybe perhaps the insurance company will wake up and realize that this is too much of a liability to be storing this data. A little idealized, but that's kind of the world that I'm going to try working towards.
Do you think this needs to be enforced through legislation, or you think it's company-based?
I think legislation is required when companies don't go down the correct path.
But I mean, also we have legislation coming next year in Europe saying that you're not supposed to store data unless you can explain why, and you have a very good reason for it. Of course, then we'll see different reasons for it, and those will be trialed somewhere. But I mean, there is legislation saying you're not supposed to do this, and then I think the what's interesting is to see how we will be. I won't say forced. I hate the word forced, but we will somehow and still be giving up our data to get something else, which we're doing today as well. I mean, you're buying something by giving away the data you have. So, yeah.
So, sorry about that.
It has our distance.
Okay, is that okay now? Okay. So, my take on that is that what's happening today is that consumers are not well educated on what they're giving up. They see companies provide these free services or free products without the realization of what that means in the future. So there needs to be some sort of counter. We're not at the point where consumers know enough to where they can, at least from my perspective, safely share that information.
Whose responsibility do you think that is? Would it fall into maybe the security people or subject matter experts to either put things in place so that to kind of protect the consumer for them not knowing really the consequences, or maybe to stand up inside the corporation and kind of push back on some of this type of things? Or where would that really rely on? I mean, sometimes it's hard for us to make a right call on this one.
I think that we have to speak up and share with our peers and those that are not in security, that of what is actually happening when you share your information, and just be a beacon to kind of distribute that information. It's not up to us because we don't know everything, but there needs to be groups that are pushing this forward or providing that information. So I think one of the things I like to encourage people to do is, if you're in security and you're pushing security and it's not being effective, maybe it's time to take a role that's not security focused, and then apply and that knowledge that you have in security to those different roles. So it's kind of like we need to almost like get the word out, right? To simplify that.
I agree. I think we need to sort of educate organizations, in particular large organizations. If you consider car companies have been, except for Tesla and a few more, have been around for decades. And those companies have gone through a evolution from being mechanical companies to being electrical companies to now being software companies. And if you look at the senior management, they don't really know what's possible and what really, I mean, they look at the money flows and they don't really look at what's generating that, right? So I think there needs to be something, I mean, we need to see a change from the inside of companies as well. Otherwise, it will just be them providing more and more possibilities for using data for different purposes. So I would like to see something within companies as well. But the question is, how do you educate senior management and how do you drive that change? But I would like to see it on the inside of the companies as well.
Yeah, I would think you have to a degree, but at least in America, that doesn't seem to be a big part of the conversation. If anything, I see the opposite. Like, hey, Google collects data, we should probably do that. It's almost how it is. And there's no discussion of retention policies or what to collect. Anonymizing data never comes up. They don't even know how they're going to sell it, but it must make money because Google and Facebook do it, you know? So there's some really weird kind of things going on that I've seen, at least in the US, with no repercussions yet.
And on top of that, we keep getting these disclosure letters, and you get your first letter, you get your second letter, you get your third letter. After your fifth letter, you're like, oh, okay, another letter. They're aside, right? So,
but I love the coming legislation with regard to that. They will be forced to provide the letters. I mean, that text will have to be understandable and brief so that people actually can read it and understand it. And that I really like because it's sort of user focused. The user should understand what they're getting themselves
You mean
into.
the little fine prints when you?
Yeah, the fine prints shouldn't be fine anymore.
Right.
You know.
But it becomes the same. I don't think that's necessarily effective because, like, you always see that fine print. And you're like, oh, okay, I understand it. And then you go on, even if it's just 6 bullets saying.
Now you have like 60 pages of it.
Right now today it's 60 pages, but let's say in the future, if you make it easily understandable, it's like 6 bullets, right? I see those same 6 bullets all the time. It's not going to register. That's my point.
You also brought up something earlier.
Then we're back at the education of the users.
Right. And you brought up something earlier too about having them choose what they're going to agree on, and also for trade-offs. Like, so are you picturing, or maybe in this law even states it, when you're simplifying, like, hey, they want this data, is it for this reason you agree to that section? Is that how you're picturing this? And then you have another section for a different trade-off, or is it just scroll to bottom, I agree to those icons that we now have, or something? I mean, what are we thinking it's going to look like?
So I'm thinking, based on what I said earlier, the idealized world is, anonymized, no collection, right? But that's not going to happen. Companies, the real value for today and the future is in that data collection. So, but the consumer should have the right to opt into each type of data type, not just opt into data collection. Do you allow us to collect data? Yes or no? It should be more granular.
Yeah. What I would like to see as a user and as a researcher is that you I mean, you might be willing to share certain data for certain purposes. So, okay, so this data will collect and share to save lives. I think most people would accept that, since most people, for example, buy Volvos to survive. And then you have, okay, so this data will use for improvement of functionality. And then some people might find that reasonable and others will opt out. And then also, and this data will use for research, for future improvements or future products or whatever. So I think that would, as a user, I would appreciate that, at least, to be able to contribute, understand what I'm contributing to as well. Not only which data, but why.
Yeah, I would even go further. Sorry, Garcia had a question.
So how would you, I mean, you can see what data leaves your device, but if you opt for like what it can be used for, that happens sort of in the black magic box within the company. How do you enforce or have some kind of mechanism in place so you can actually make sure that what happens?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yeah.
So you're wondering how you make sure that the data is actually, that set of data is actually used for the purpose that I agreed to. Is that the question? Yes. Yeah. I think, I think that's a lot of people worry about how we can handle that, because the legislation says, the coming legislation, which is quite harsh. I don't know if how many of you are European and know about the GDPR? Yeah. So you probably know that the legislation says you need to, if you want to collect data, you need to tell people why you want to collect it, what are you going to use it for. So a lot of people are now worrying about how to make that happen. But I think we'll see that in large companies that want to survive, I think we'll see that they package these things and say, okay, so we are saving data, wheel sensors and whatnot, in order to detect, ice on the road or whatever. I think we'll see that. But I find it troublesome, because we are seeing a lot of machine learning in order to improve functionality and safety as well. And there you cannot, to begin with, you cannot say, but I need this data for this purpose. You have no idea what you need it for to begin with, because you might detect something new. So in that case, to me, how do you still take care of, how do you still have those possibilities to do that while not harming the user or not, invading?
It's the creeping inference problem. It's the one where you say, I'm going to use it for this purpose. So how do you define that purpose? Actually, in order to do that purpose, I need to just ease off this side a little bit. That then moves me into something else where I use that. That then moves me into this. And before you know it, the entire thing is covered. You cannot, it's not possible to define things, because there's always an exclusion that you have that opens up further possibilities. So yeah, you just can't do that.
And your car will be updated and get new functionality and so on. So
it's
like what happens in your car is easier to.
Sorry.
What happens on your car is easier for, I guess, researchers to follow, because you can take one in your garage and figure out what's going on. But whatever happens at the company is really hard
but as a researcher, you might want to say that we need, I won't say all data, but you might want to say we need all data that's accumulated from this. And we want to figure something out. We have no idea what the result will be, but we would like to look at it. So as a researcher, you might want to be that free and say, I need all of this. I don't know what's going to lead to, but I want to improve safety of the system. So, but I think we will see, they are looking into how to handle research and that type of needs as well. So, yeah.
I just want to point out that there's probably an opposite direction to this situation, because the collected data can't be blindly trusted. An attacker can create a huge amount of false data for profit or just for fun, and this must be controlled somehow.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that you feel that the attacker will put in, or a malicious person just put false data into the network?
I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm driving to work. I'm stuck. I see a lot of traffic on the roads, or create some false messages that there is a major traffic accident ahead of me. So everyone leaves the road and I'm driving free. Just an example. Using this,
or just traffic lights. Or traffic lights. I mean, you can affect that as well. Absolutely. And then you have the correct decision-making based on wrong data. Yeah.
Yeah, the trouble is that only works for a single instance. If everyone's doing that strategy, So we're back into gaming theory here. If
No one can trust anyone.
If you have an algorithm that is different to everyone else's, that's fine. You can have that sort of approach. Unfortunately, everyone else, or a certain percentage of people, are likely to have the same algorithm, and so everyone else will be doing the same thing, and so they will all cancel each other out. So it doesn't work. It works for an individual. It's a great thing in a wonderful nirvana perfect world with unicorns and rainbows. But it doesn't work in practice, because as soon as everyone has access to the same technology, they're all going to use the same algorithm, and all you're going to get is noise. And so you return back to how we are now.
So
it's a great idea.
So this data will have no value because it's
Yeah. So you reduce the value of the data.
So reducing the value of data, are you also claiming that putting a bunch of data up in these different customers, or not customers, but these different companies' databases also would have a chance of leaking? But with things like Equifax, those kinds of leaks, is it like, well, everybody already has our social security number and credit card and stuff anyway, therefore who cares if we give it to? It's already out there. I mean, that kind of thing as well? Or you're just talking about like, there's so much...
You do eventually get to the point where everyone's data has been leaked. And at that point, what's the value of the data? Also, you get the thing where everyone's faked data has been leaked, at which point, how do you know which is the real data and which is the fake data?
AI.
So we're missing the point now, right? Because the real data has been leaked, and that's the issue.
True, but it's well known that a lot of the data that is leaked is often wrong, because the people who gather the data, that data gathering is a flawed process. And so it's difficult enough to get data corrected when it's your real data. Getting the data about you that is wrong and that is faked changed is almost impossible, because usually it's not under your control. And so all the fake data that's there around you is outside of your control, can't be changed, etc. So the value of the data goes down and down all the time.
Well, the value of the data goes down, but like as an individual whose real data is in there, you could still be victimized. I mean, like an attacker doesn't care about like the 30 credit card numbers.
But so could your fake personality as well, that's done by all the bad data. And that won't affect you.
Well, but the real data will affect you, so...
Yeah.
But I think we, of course, we have the privacy aspect of it as well, but we have larger needs of data and sharing of data, for example, between the vehicles, now that we're seeing coordinated driving in platoons and so on. So corruption of that type of data is not only a privacy issue, but also a safety issue, because you might kill people or, So I think looking into corruption of that is
That's a great way of doing terrorism, isn't it?
Shh. Yeah, of course it is. But
There are much easier ways than that.
I wanted to go back to regulations, but outside of the realm of data. In general, how do you guys see regulations? Do you support them? Do you think because Bay Area completely rejects it. Sometimes it works really well when it has worked well when it's been Tesla, and then there have been other companies who have completely flaunted it. But do you think regulations have a place? And if they do, how does it even work out in the global landscape? Because one country restricting or laying the rules may not make sense in the global arena.
That's actually several questions, but I think in regards to the Bay Area completely rejecting it, my take on it is that you should try without legislation, but if it's not working without it, then you need to legislate. And I think we're at the point or beyond the point where, especially with autonomous vehicles coming right around the corner, level 4 autonomy, this vehicle is right around the corner. There's a lot of things that need to be changed. Cars today are just way too easy to hack. There isn't a connected car on the road that can't be hacked. And then if you make it autonomous, that's where the steering wheel goes away. You have a serious issue. Well, actually today with drive-by-wire, you have a serious issue. So in order to get car companies to move faster, you have to legislate. Unfortunately.
I agree.
Well, I have a follow-up question. This is talking about autonomy. as we move to self-driving cars and full autonomy, I've heard things before where people have said we can't allow consumers to tinker with that type of technology or to build their own self-driving car because it's a risk of safety. How do you guys feel about that?
I think like if you tinker your car, it's almost like you're opting into another track. And, I'm okay with let's say if you tinker your car where there's an issue with it that you are liable because you chose to tinker your car. And I think most manufacturers might actually be, even though, more warm to that concept. But when it comes to if you have an autonomous vehicle where all the cars on the road are supposed to be autonomous, then if you're tinkering with the autonomous systems and sensors, then your car should not be autonomous anymore. Meaning that I'm basically saying that you are not part of that collective. Autonomous vehicles with V2V and V2I almost function like a collective of cars, right? They communicate with each other, tell each other's location, position, so forth. One day, perhaps, we'll have sensors and compute that's fast enough and capable where when a car detects a non-autonomous vehicle careening towards it, that it can respond properly. But ultimately, it's the person who is liable for making decisions. The car is this giant 5,000-pound device, right? So if you choose to tamper with your autonomous system, it's there should be some record that tampering has occurred, and that technically you can be liable for it. Just like if I fix up my car and the throttle sticks and I crash into another car, I can't. It's the same situation. So I modified that car that caused an issue.
So you feel that it's okay for them to make changes, make modifications, or maybe in self-driving vehicles? Now, can they participate into that collective as well? Like if you have a V2X system, are you allowed to work in the V2X system, or you got to be marked as the black sheep who is not one of them?
Well, V2X at some point in time needs to be able to cars individually need to be able to rate cars around them, right, in order to make decisions as to whether this car is a higher risk. So maybe perhaps it could be the flag that you receive is that you're a non-autonomous vehicle.
And I think we're up to the knowledge of the user. How can you guarantee that the car that you are sort of competent enough to do so and to still participate in the collective, as you say? I mean, if you go to just a couple of years or a decade into the future and you see platooning, how can you accept a car like that to participate in a platoon without, and platoons in particular of not of different brands, because there have to be regulations to to just look at the interfaces between and so on. So I think it goes to competence of the person. Maybe we should have a stand or I don't know, the certification of users. Okay, so you can tamper with the car and you cannot. I don't know, but I mean, it goes to competence for me, and people outside the automotive industry might not have the whole picture, might not realize the consequences of certain things.
So you're saying that all the cars have to behave exactly the same. So we've already had community, we've already had black sheep. So what happens in real biological systems when you have a community that's all identical? You don't get communities that are all identical. There are always tiny differences between them. And if any of those differences give you a competitive advantage, that then becomes dominant and becomes a predator, and all the rest just become the prey. And so unless you can actually make all your cars behave exactly the same, how are you going to do that in a competitive market where every manufacturer is going to say that their car is better at getting you from A to B than any other manufacturer?
Don't they say that already?
Yes, but you have to make it so that if it's going to work, all the cars have to be absolutely identical.
But
have anyone who tweaks a car, because if it does so, you've then got a predator. You've got something that is going to be significantly better than everything else, and everyone else is going to hate it. It's exactly like when you get on a plane. The reason you go through first class and business class first is to remind you that you didn't have a first class or a business class ticket. And so it's exactly the same. The next time you think, I want to get a business class or a first class ticket, exactly the same. People are going to want to have some advantage to their car that's going to get them from A to B faster, and they will do anything to get it because that puts them in the lead. It's a race. This is not nice, equal organisms all traveling at the same pace, and you can't do that. We don't work like that.
but
Biological organisms don't work that way, and neither do the cars that we produce.
if I may, is it okay? Yeah. I think we'll see. I understand what you're saying, but I think what we'll see is it will come with the mobility as a service introduction, because then you will be buying the possibility to move from A to B rather than buying a car. So today you might want to take the Lexus and go in the fast lane, and tomorrow you might be fine with the Nissan and, go in the slow lane, and because you have a phone meeting. So don't you think that might actually solve that problem? When ownership is moved from an individual to, you own the ability to move rather than a vehicle.
You can still have different transportation as a service providers, where one offers a more aggressive, whatever fleet that gets you from A to B faster, right? So
yeah, and you might have different lanes and different,
it might become like the carpool lanes that we have in California, for example. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the express lanes, where if you have two people in the car, you can drive in those lanes. So perhaps that's how on the freeway the autonomous vehicles will operate in the future, is that they would end up in those express lanes where they can go 100 miles an hour, maybe 20 miles an hour faster, but they all function like a train, right? So, and then because there is going to be a long stretch where people like me are still going to want to drive my, manual stick shift, fixed up car, right? So, so there's going to be a transition period, and perhaps, as human beings, we want to have that sense of control, and we'll discover that we'll never get to the point where there's all cars autonomous.
I think we're seeing new generations that are not interested in driving as well.
That's true.
And then you have people with health issues and people getting older that cannot drive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the segment of us in between that still would like to drive, and we're going to get older and not be able to drive. So the question is how long does it take before people would like to have control over something else than the car? I think we'll always have something like that, like a fast car. But the question is, will it be car and ability to move, or will it be something else?
Yes, but
how long did it take since the moment the cars appeared until the moment people stopped riding horses?
Yeah, I actually heard a talk about that. I think it was like, a decade or two, but it went quite fast, and they managed to coexist. It wasn't a big issue. Everyone was quite scared about it, but they managed quite fine.
Just like
the cars, the traffic system worked out quite well. Yeah.
So there will be some transitional period of a couple of decades.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Personally, I can't wait for this to happen.
You hate driving?
No, I don't hate driving, but I hate being stuck in the traffic.
Right, everybody else on the road sucks. No, I get it. Was there a question back here?
Yeah, I have a art question. So you are from car industry. You know that safety and security is important. And let's imagine that we are living in a perfect world when the customer has money and knowledge. So you can easily discuss with him saying, hey, security is important. So my question is, what is your vision or your advice to create or to build a secure system architecture, knowing all these vulnerabilities, can or software or hardware?
Okay, so
Yeah.
Okay,
You go.
so
we know our problem know, yeah, or maybe in 1 year, 1.5 years, we're not gonna fix it. So what is your vision for this? What we need to have to avoid to have some secure systems?
Okay.
Because the system part is very complex.
So my take on it is that we are still very far away from that, right? From a security perspective. The components that go into cars today are not designed to be on the internet. And that's one of the sources of our problem. And so that needs to change. Of course, it's easy to say that we can never have 100% security, right? But that needs to change before we can even get close to that state. There needs to be standardizations around how vehicle systems, microprocessor and components communicate with each other. That doesn't exist. Encryption needs to be utilized. Most cars, there is no encryption. Even when the microprocessors can do accelerated encryption. So we're not there. That's my first concern. And to get there, something needs to happen. There needs to be a lot more research. And because I don't think we're doing it right. And there's a lot of talk today about borrowing from IT, and IT is doing it wrong. So, yeah, it's more research, more effort to build secure components, more education so that engineers know that they're building things that can end lives, right? It's lives at stake. You can't cut corners, take chances.
And I also think if you look at the organizational pressure, what sells cars, it's not security. It's, you can sell a car, you can sell a new music system, you can sell, people even opt out of safety to buy a prettier car. So it doesn't sell, which means that it's not in focus enough. So
let's suppose that security is in focus. Let's suppose that the customer, a small company, comes to you and say, hey, I want to build something very secure. So tell me what to do. I want to invest, I have knowledge.
I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think we need to do a lot more work on that before we can say anything. I don't think there's a short answer to that question at all, unfortunately. So if I ever know how to build a secure car, I'll let you know. But yeah.
How are we doing on time? Are we? Okay. Do you want me to ask a? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you guys off. I just noticed we went past. You want to last when we ask a question for the audience? You had mentioned that before. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys a question. And this isn't specifically to vehicles, like anything hardware based. Do you think the consumers should really ever have the ability to modify their electronics devices? And if so, where is that line? Is it based on price? Is it based on safety? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to take you right the way back. I think isn't this a philosophical question, right? It's really, posit freedom equals the possibility of insecurity, right? And that just extends from the device you buy to society, right? And the discussion we've been having would have pleased Plato. Do read his Republic at some time, because it's about, here we are, broadly speaking, similar educational standards, similar aspirations, right? We are Platonic philosophers, and we are saying what's good for society, right? And that brings, we can't help it, right? Just by the nature of who we are and who we hang out with, and we have very little insight into the lives of people who live very differently from us. We can gaze up at the very rich and know that they're very different from us. It's very hard to gaze down at the very poor, who are not very far away. And our discussions about cars are great, but, you really have to think, somebody who's driving around a €500 car, this is just abstract. They're going to continue to want to do that. When does this autonomous, fantastic electric vehicle come in? You know, are we going to bring these things out? How many people are we going to put out of work by arranging these things? You know, what's going to replace those, right? Those are the things that are going to make people angry. It's a bigger project than just that. So should people have the right to modify their stuff? Well, that's a good question, right? If we've moved to a society that's moved from the manufacture of things to the manufacture of ideas, then maybe we care a very great deal about DRM, because all our salaries depend on our intellectual property that we produce on a daily basis being protected. However hateful and restrictive we might then feel that comes along, right? And that then plays into the whole business of regulation, but regulation's too late. You know, all those people who lost their data with the thing, you know, how many of them are going to be able to change their mother's maiden name? How many people can change their date of birth? It's too late. The genie's out of the bottle. Great fan of, as I am, of the GDPR, it's too late. And so I think, you know, I think we have to abstract ourselves away from the narrow technical arguments about whether we can build these things. Yeah, I mean, they're interesting conversations that will keep us occupied and hopefully employed for a long time. But actually there's a bigger project here, which is to figure out what we're prepared to do as a society, is accept in terms of the trade-offs, frankly, between the, you know, my freedom to buy a knife is also the insecurity that might engender in somebody else. And we have to, you know, they have to balance that. My freedom to use a car to commit a crime is going to be, you know, is impacted if there's lots of telemetry that then makes I get a call. You might go, great, but equally there is a loss of freedom there around what we do, and we have to balance that. So I think it's a bigger problem. So I do urge you to read Politics and Philosophy. Start with Plato.
I think we'll stop with that, and I'd like to thank the panelists for our time. Yeah.